My name is Yasmina Sahir. I'm a student in the Criminology and Social Justice BA programs, pursuing future graduate work in Middle Eastern, North African, and Arab cultural studies. Both my academic and personal experiences as a second-generation Moroccan American have informed my advocacy on the topic I'm here to discuss with you all today. Creating a category for Middle Eastern, North African, Arab, MENA Americans, distinct from the white American category on all University of Iowa surveys, and why UI should be implementing this change now while awaiting the results of a similar debate happening at the federal level. Nations most commonly included in academic reference to the MENA region are Algeria, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Palestine and occupied territories, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. MENA Americans are as vastly diverse as the geography of their home/ancestral region. They can be brown, black, or white presenting, Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, and speak a variety of languages. But physical diversity does not mean MENA Americans do not belong to their own distinct racial category. Recognized by the University of Iowa Department of Sociology coursework and explained on the U.S. Census website, race is nothing more than a social construct, a categorization system based on societal perceptions of individuals with shared cultural, ancestral, and linguistic backgrounds, as MENA Americans do have with each other. Although originally thought to be true, race and ethnicity has nothing to do with biology. Stereotypes aligning certain physical features with a racial group, such as skin tone, eye shape, skeleton structure, and more, are not based on science and only further harmful hierarchies between racial groups. In the 21st century United States, a post-9/11 hyper-militarized society, MENA Americans and their Muslim peers are reduced to stereotypes about terrorism, called racial slurs, and seen as culturally backwards due to the West viewing itself as superior to the East. In the words of Edward Said, Palestinian author of the 1978 book Orientalism, I quote, "Arabs, for example, are thought of as camel-riding, terroristic, hook-nosed lechers, whose undeserved wealth is an affront to real civilization. Always there lurks the assumption that although the Western consumer belongs to a numerical minority, he is entitled either to own or to expend, or both, the majority of the world's resources. Why? Because he, unlike the Oriental, is a true human being," end quote. Because of ongoing socio-political conditions which alienate and marginalize MENA Americans, a team of independent researchers in 2016 recommended that the National Office of Management and Budget create a Middle Eastern, North African American demographic category for the 2020 census, as MENA Americans no longer fit the definition of white American. Following the Trump administration and a rise in far-right white supremacist movements around the nation, whiteness has begun to exclusively reference European ethnic, Christian, racially white Americans. While the 2016 MENA proposal was rejected in 2018 by then-President Donald Trump after his Muslim travel ban was instituted, it is important to recognize this proposal, and current ones like it, are not built exclusively on 21st century ideas of what whiteness or non-whiteness means. This is not a trend, or, as some opponents of this proposal have stated, a group of white people playing people of color. The inclusion of MENA as white has been policy since 1944, after several legislative acts only allowed for free white persons and later free black persons to become U.S. citizens. MENA, being neither white nor black, fought to be placed in the white category to pursue naturalization in the U.S. Today, as American culture and laws have changed, MENA Americans are stuck somewhere in the middle of this racial binary, unrecognized and overlooked. A 2020 Yale Herald article by then-student Anastasia Ibrahim explains the otherness of being in between the American white-black racial binary, a result of the aforementioned 20th century legislation, and how this contributes to the current lack of MENA representation. I quote, "At Yale, some of us are grouped in the Black African-American category, some of us Asian American, some of us white, some of us other. Institutional nomenclature renders our identification process convoluted, ambiguous, and unattainable because they have intentionally generated a diaspora of our population. We don't belong anywhere and we aren't being accounted for," end quote. Since the 1980s and 90s, MENA Americans have run various campaigns, including the Y'all Count in 2020 and the early 2000s Check It Right, You Ain't White, to fight for federal recognition. Even with decades of hard work and advocacy, we are now approaching the 5th census cycle in 2030 where MENA calls for change may potentially go unanswered. The U.S. is the only Western country that does not view MENA as a racial minority group, but the U.S. still systemically exploits, marginalizes, and speaks over MENA Americans and their demands to be heard. The majority of MENA Americans do not align themselves with, nor receive the privileges associated with whiteness. Some of you may be wondering, if the U.S. at large doesn't collect this data and has rejected proposals to do so, what is stopping UI from collecting this data for academic/research purposes? Is University of Iowa even allowed to collect this data in the first place, and the federal government doesn't collect the data itself? If so, I was thinking the same thing about a year ago. In an email response from the UI Office of the Provost in summer 2022, I was informed, quote, similar to other institutions in the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the University of Iowa utilizes federal reporting categories and methodology to collect race and ethnic data for students, faculty, and staff, end quote. This answer was not satisfying to me. It has not yet been unheard of for administrators to change campus surveys rather than strictly follow U.S. Census guidelines for the purpose of inclusion and diversity. Example of this includes providing students the opportunity to select their gender on campus forms from a list that goes beyond the heteronormative gender binary, even though male and female are the only options currently listed for gender on the U.S. Census. I applaud efforts for inclusion for all groups, but I'm left to wonder, why can't the same exceptions be made for MENA? Noting this double standard, I spent the rest of that summer making calls. From these informal conversations, I was led to registrar and admissions offices at University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, Ohio State, University of Illinois, all Big Ten universities, in which I was informed that their campuses count MENA in on demographic surveys and have for several years in some cases. Outside the Big Ten Conference, universities and colleges on both U.S. coasts are already doing the same or working to implement similar changes. As one example, Vanderbilt University in Tennessee recently announced they will begin including a MENA option on all healthcare forms within their hospital system to work on identifying MENA community health needs. Because their voices are left unheard at University of Iowa, MENA students are denied rights given to other groups of color on campus. We have no cultural space to gather in and host cultural events. We have no formal ways to identify MENA students for campus DEI initiatives, such as creation of a cultural graduation ceremony, a yearly occurrence for other non-white campus communities. We cannot build a community and argue for DEI initiatives at University of Iowa, but there is no way for any single MENA student to know that others like them exist. But the consequences for campuses like University of Iowa are small in comparison to the wider implications of being underrepresented, especially in research. Without representation, MENA Americans continue to face higher medical risks, lower birth rates, and die younger than their white American peers. Without representation, MENA Americans are less likely to own their own homes when compared to their white peers. Without representation, MENA Americans are not always offered resources that foster success in school, are subsequently less likely to pursue higher education, and are also unlikely to obtain employment that pays above poverty wages. Without representation, MENA Americans continue to face hate crimes, discrimination, stereotyping, and community alienation around the U.S. and at University of Iowa, without formal mechanisms to seek accountability for these encounters, because if you're white, you can't be discriminated against. Without representation, MENA Americans are left without any other conclusion than University of Iowa cannot be bothered to add another box on their quality surveys, so those with the capacity and interest to do so can complete necessary research to save lives, improve social conditions, and combat the racism and discrimination happening right here on campus, in Iowa, and around the U.S. Quoting a 2020 journal article by sociologist Neda Mengele and co-authors, I quote, "Beyond the MENA case, we hope that this work supports ongoing research and advocacy around inequalities faced by communities that are rendered invisible through current means of data collection and categorization. Grassroots ideas about racial categories, even when not officially sanctioned by the state, are a powerful force in the social construction of race," end quote. According to a White House proclamation made by President Joseph R. Biden on March 31st, 2023, April is now federally recognized as Arab American History Month. In his statement, he says he calls upon all Americans to learn more about the history, culture, and achievements of Arab Americans, and to observe this month with appropriate programs and activities. This April, University of Iowa has stayed silent. It feels painfully ironic that I, as a student at a Research One institution, known around the nation for the work it produces, especially in the health and science fields. I find myself explaining to these same professionals at a research-run institution why research for MENA matters. That shouldn't be my job. Research means resource allocation. Research means guaranteed representation. Research means more convincing, evidence-based calls for change instead of relying on individuals within the MENA community to speak from personal experience to prove injustices are occurring every day. University of Iowa has the opportunity and the capacity to create meaningful change for one of the largest growing immigrant groups in the United States. MENA students and staff are here and we're speaking out. While other marginalized groups are amplified, MENA Americans are left to wonder, why not us too? In summary, a single box can have powerful, wide-reaching impacts. Thank you.